Hi there, it's great to be with you, and unfortunately we can't be together in person, but Estonia is a place that I absolutely love and I've been to many times before, and I hope that the ideas and inspiration that I can share with you today is something that will resonate with people both in Estonia and across all of the different countries who are watching. So thank you for joining. Quick introduction to myself. I'm Nick Hall, and I'm the founder of a company called the Digital Tourism Think Tank. Now, you may be wondering, how is somebody from an organization called the Digital Tourism Think Tank talking to us about innovation in the food sector? Well, actually, you'll find that there are many convergences between the food industry and the visitor economy. And I'm going to talk to you today about where we see innovation taking place and those two topics coming together in perfect harmony. Now, as you'll probably see on your screen right now, I'm going to be taking you through a really huge interactive canvas where we can explore these ideas together. I'm going to share with you a link to this canvas so that you can also look at it in detail in your own time. And I've prepared this for us today to give you a really good understanding of where we see innovation happening across the sector and where there's some really exciting developments and ideas that you might be able to tap into. So thanks for joining, and stay with me whilst we go on this journey through innovation. Well, let's start out by looking at where we are today. If we take this macro level topic that we've titled this presentation, Trends and Vision in the Culinary Tourism Sector, we can imagine many really exciting ideas. One of the favorite restaurant concepts that I've seen in recent years is Dinner in the Sky. That really great idea of taking people up on a crane and being able to enjoy a Michelin star meal with an incredible view. But times have changed, and the way in which we experience the world around us is no longer like it was. And as we talk today, remotely, we have to be conscious of the changes that have taken place and what the potential impact is for not only our industry, but every sector, and in fact, consumers and the society in general, and how we live our lives. A lot has changed, and therefore we need to understand what has changed and how that impacts the way we do the things that we do. Well, first of all, there are new realities. The experience we have of the world around us has been redefined. We spend a lot more time indoors. We cherish things like family in a way that we perhaps didn't have that same appreciation for it before. And we also are much more considerate of our local, our nearby environment, because we're spending so much time in our local environment. We don't get the opportunity to travel as we once did. For businesses, there is this harsh reality of the turnover gap, that is the lost revenue, that beyond the pandemic that we have right now, the lost revenue that you may be predicting or foreseeing in the mid-term future, and how to address that if you're a business that relies a lot on the visitor economy, that leisure economy of people going out and enjoying those incredible experiences. And then, of course, you've got the reality that with change comes the need to pivot and diversify. And this has been a concurrent theme throughout the last year. It's been a necessity for many businesses to think about how to make that adaptation, how to survive in the new normal, and how to make up for lost revenue wherever it finds itself. And so that's where we're at. And that is the point at which I'm going to start this journey today with you, where we explore what that means for us as an industry, as individual businesses, producers, restaurants, as tourism providers, or as consumers. If we can understand that, and we can understand what's happening in the market, then we're in a much stronger position to reimagine our offer and think about how to adapt that for the new normal. So let's jump in, and I'm going to zoom down to the first part of today's presentation and have a look at what's been happening. Well, 2020 has seen a whole range of what we would refer to as trending social movements. This is an unprecedented momentum that's taken place online, where we've seen communities come together digitally to share those experiences. Everybody will probably remember in Italy seeing those really heartwarming scenes of people clapping on their balconies and playing music with each other. So whilst we perhaps couldn't be together, a great sense of community evolved out of this crisis that we find ourselves in. And to understand how that has reflected online, which is an area that we're very passionate about, we need to look at data. We need to look at what the data is showing us in terms of how people are responding to that. And we can look at data from the likes of YouTube to see that there's a pattern that has been emerging during this period. People are seeking to make different connections, social connections online, but they're also looking to work on that element of self-care, that personal development. How can I use that extra time that perhaps I didn't expect having to improve and better myself? And we've seen people joining movements, often unified through hashtags, such as with me. That's referring to the idea of following along with someone else and learning something at home, remotely, virtually, through remote Zoom classes, for example. We saw things in the tourism sector like museum from home taking off and being really, really interesting hashtags that have represented many opportunities to go and discover new content. And we saw social movements such as For Climate, bringing people together to get behind causes which matter for them. We see in the YouTube space a huge trend towards things like yoga, guided meditation, cooking along with others, and even very specific things like how do I make sourdough bread, turning to YouTube with that extra spare time, whether that's because of lockdowns and furloughs or whether that's because of the change in how we work. We have more time to enjoy and discover content online. And some of those YouTube creators have really responded to that and created brilliant content which actually connects with people and helps teach them new skills. And later we'll see how that trend of creators being able to engage their audiences in a really different way as audiences seek to learn and develop in a way that they've never done before is a trend that businesses, brands, producers have all realized is an opportunity to tap into. And what I want to say to you now is that this is not a trend which we expect to go away. Perhaps it will dilute a little bit, but it is certainly something which is here to stay. And even platforms that we perhaps dismissed, maybe because we're not that demographic or we weren't that interested, platforms like TikTok have really shown us how they can be used to engage with users in very interesting ways. For example, teaching how to produce honey and teaching how to make certain dishes and inviting users on these platforms to do it along with the creators and effectively create a social movement of everybody trying to do the same thing, guided by experts and influencers. So this idea of connecting with others online is really strong. It's that social connection which I was talking about at the start. But there's also a cultural connection there as well. And that cultural connection is one of food in the context of what we're discussing today. Well, we've been following what's happening in the food space for a long time because food and tourism are two things which are inherently linked with each other. In fact, food and discovering food is one of the biggest drivers of travel globally, and it's always the center of almost every tourism strategy wherever you go in the world. And everybody has a different take on it because it's also cultural. So if we look at the likes of Sweden, Sweden is very proud of having a lot of open space, having the freedom to roam anywhere in Sweden, and having a real connection with nature. So a few years ago now, Sweden created a campaign called The Edible Country. It was more than just a campaign, actually. It was a whole initiative to create new product, to create a series of tables in different locations throughout the country in the nature where you could reserve online and book a table in the middle of a forest, for example, or on a remote island, and have a hamper brought to you and ready for you to enjoy fresh, locally sourced, foraged food. What a brilliant idea to get people to go out, to discover the environment, that natural environment, and then discover the food that's prepared from that environment. This is a great example of product development and tying that in with a story. And you can see here with Jacob's dish for Sweden's edible country, just how that comes together as a really inspirational storytelling approach. This is about talking about menus, talking about that short-circuit food chain, talking about the chefs which represent the best of that country's cuisine, and bringing it all together in a package that's inspirational and motivates people to travel. We've seen this is not only in places like Sweden, where we see this huge shift towards discovering local produce. It's all over the world. One of my favorites, and it's not that new actually, but I thought it would be great to set the scene for today, is the idea around food storytelling and what Visit California have done. Visit California created an on-demand video platform, a sort of rival to Netflix if you like, but all about California. And they've created heaps and heaps of content that's available on demand and organized by different themes. And around the food theme, they've got together with a great character called, he calls himself the California Dream Eater. And he travels all over California and he's just passionate about food. And he's always looking for independent, new discoveries to tell their story and to tell his take on their story. Well, the California Dream Eater is something which really took off for them. And it became something that didn't just promote the destination, but it actually was something that people wanted to subscribe to, because this is a guy who can share really great new tips and help others discover what there is in California. And this is where tourism marketing has reached. It's not just about promoting places, it's about getting underneath the skin, getting a sense of excitement, and creating a sense of connection and loyalty through sequential video in this case. We see other really great examples of creativity happening in this space. So Airbnb, which we're all familiar with, has long been a very disruptive player in the tourism industry. And one of the things that they did a number of years ago, back in 2016, was team up with the on-demand video platform and food channel, if you like, Tastemade, to create a new concept called the Airbnb Open 2016. They got together lots of chefs and they created a virtual festival environment, all shot in studios, I might add, to showcase the best flavors of LA through an Airbnb perspective. This idea of local hosts and connecting with real people. They basically created a huge party which really allowed them to lift and tell the story of their hosts and the destination through that passion for food. Something perhaps a little bit unexpected for a player like Airbnb. And then we see destinations like Visit Jersey, one that we've worked with for many years, continuously exploring how they can lift the food offer from the destination. And they talk often about the farm to fork story, that heritage and that connection between the land and the produce and the experience of visiting the destination. Of course, we all know that Jersey is famous for its cows and the Jersey Royals, but it's also very famous for things like the Jersey oysters. And with such rich and incredible produce coming from this little island, they have a fantastic story to tell. So part of the brand of Jersey is intertwined and incorporating this really rich story around the produce of Jersey. And of course, whilst we might promote produce to get it into international markets, there's another side of linking that story together with the experience of visiting the destination. Now, we worked a lot with Visit Jersey on how to lift that story and how to also go a little bit further to create experiences that visitors can do when they visit Jersey that connects them to the story we tell. So one of those examples is going out onto the oyster beds and discovering what that oyster farming process looks like, learning about oysters and tasting those all in the same experience. It's something which perhaps wasn't necessarily open to visitors to experience before, but with that inspirational story and that interest in tasting those flavors, there's a really clear connection there to the experience. Another thing which has become very popular in recent years is foraging. We see it happening everywhere, that visitors are driven to learn more about the food that they can forage around them. And in Jersey, they have a brilliant guide who's part of many of the stories that they tell, which is all about foraging food in that natural environment of Jersey. And much of that makes its way onto Michelin star plates, and much of it is something that people can just try and experience in the nature whilst they're in the destination. So another great example of connecting people in a really meaningful way with the food story of the destination. Another destination which has taken a slightly different approach is Singapore. Well, Singapore have recently changed their strategy. They focused on a new brand concept called Passion Made Possible, and they organized the different target groups that they wanted to engage with and invite and attract to Singapore into different segments. And one of those segments was the foodies segment, a really important segment for a country which is very small and very eclectic in terms of its food offering. The melting pot of different cultures and different dishes that come with that is something which makes Singapore and the food experience in Singapore truly unique. And they realize that this is a story that they can tell. So as you can see here, very, very passionately telling that story through the storytelling approach of the top chefs that you can find in Singapore, talking about where they find inspiration, the passion and the drive they have for what they do, but complemented with a discovery, which comes also with a sort of education. So you can learn about Singaporean food and actually get to know both the passion behind the people in the destination who are driving the food scene forward, but also the mix of flavors and tastes that are unique to Singapore that you can experience and where you can experience them as well, providing these kind of top tips and hidden gems. Well, if we look to see how things have evolved during the pandemic, we see something really interesting happening, because we've been telling the story of food in tourism for quite a long time, perhaps surprisingly so, but it is a great way of bringing the destination forward and enriching the story around the destination. But recently, it's a trend which has moved into every other field as well. And we've seen things like podcasts seeing a real revival as people start to turn towards what we call long-form media. That is longer content rather than this very swipeable, skimmable, short-form content that we're used to on social media. Things like podcasts now allow brands to have a really rich dialogue with their customers. And Waitrose in the UK, which is one of the more premium supermarket brands, has recognized that there's a real opportunity to connect with their customers in a deep, rich and meaningful way. They launched a podcast called Life on a Plate, where simply they talk about different food stories every time they do the podcast. And in fact, they can even find sponsors to get behind those podcasts. So it's also quite a commercially viable approach as well. It allows them to just tell the story of the food that they're passionate about, tell that around new products, new types of food, and also that seasonal story as well, with different hosts and different guests on a week-to-week basis. The key thing for a brand like Waitrose to be able to move into this space is to be able to invest in the capabilities that they have in-house to produce content, to be digitally agile and savvy, and to be able to be brilliant storytellers so that they can create a sense of excitement around what they're doing amongst their customers. Another way in which we've seen brands really evolve how they communicate online is the example of Marks & Spencer's. Well, Marks & Spencer's is, we could say, a pretty heavy rival to Waitrose in the UK, and during the pandemic they realized that the way in which people engage is quite different now. In fact, they've tapped into an opportunity not because they're closed, because in fact they're open, but because they realize the market has changed, and that means they have to engage and connect with the market differently. So one of our favorites is this example of Sparks Live. It's something that they created for their most loyal customers who have the Sparks loyalty card. And they created live studio events where they cook together with their customers who they give the ingredients to. And they create evening experiences where you can cook along live with them and make really incredible dishes. It's in fact a very social, very enjoyable, and a very interactive approach. And it's really something that I don't think we would have imagined seeing supermarkets do just a few years ago. But now this is increasingly becoming the normal way to engage with customers outside of that face-to-face experience. Not because we necessarily have to, but because it represents a really great opportunity to engage in a way that's quite unique and different. So that gives you a quick idea about some of the changes that have taken place in this space. As you can see, there is a strong shift towards rich, immersive content to tell the story behind the passion and the interest and get people to connect and engage with those stories alongside us. Well, if we now look at other areas of what's happening. We see really interesting things happening around this notion of pop-up concepts. One of our favorite here at the Digital Tourism Think Tank, and we've written a case study on it for our members, is Brolly. Brolly is a pop-up bar which basically goes into different places and creates a really unique, slightly raw bar experience in industrial buildings, in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a bar. It's a great example of creating an independent social experience around food and drink that changes the dynamic of a space and brings people together in a way that allows them to not only experience one sensory aspect of that, but actually consider everything altogether. We saw, as a result of the pandemic, in Amsterdam, a place called Mediamatic. It's an eclectic place with lots of different businesses coming together, creating a series of different spaces using this greenhouses that they actually always had there, and creating private dining experiences there. A great dining experience which was a good example of innovating to overcome a certain challenge they had. They had to be COVID safe, they had to create social distancing, and they realized that these greenhouses, which were beside the canal there, represented a great opportunity to create an exclusive dining experience. And now, as we see others starting to follow that trend, we start to see that private dining and exclusive dining experiences is in fact an increasing trend, one that's been accelerated because of the pandemic. But to reimagine how we use a space requires us to employ a certain creativity as to what can be done and how we can do it. Another out of the pandemic example, and this was one of the earliest ones we saw last summer, was Board for Één. This is such a great example of doing something that is completely out of the box. Board for Één is a one-table restaurant experience in the nature, private dining at its absolute best. Probably comes with a price tag too, but it's a great example of how you can just reimagine the price point, the produce, the offer, and the experience to create something that's still extremely exclusive. And that's an example from Sweden. We also see in Brussels innovation at a very different style of innovation taking place. Belgium is of course known for many famous chefs, and we see places like the hotel in Brussels, which have been heavily impacted by the pandemic, a huge drop in the number of guests that they can have, rules against traveling for leisure, for example, and a need to reimagine what they do with all that space. And what they've done is something really interesting. They've teamed up with a series of chefs to create dining concepts which are event-based, which allow you to book a private room plus a private bedroom, so that you can have that incredible private dining experience together with that incredible hotel experience. And because this is a skyscraper hotel with an incredible view, they managed to connect all of those different things. That really premium experience is something which really works in this context. Reimagining the restaurant from the ground floor of a hotel to the top floor, to reusing those guest rooms and turning those into dining rooms, requires a lot of imagination to think about how that could be possible, how that could work, and whether you can create a new concept, a new product, if you like, which creates a lot of interest. But we can also create new product purely with technology. Here's a great example of a restaurant in London that teamed up with an artist to celebrate Chinese New Year. And they did a wrap around the restaurant that's still closed because of the lockdown rules in the UK. And they created an augmented reality experience so that you could go and see the whole restaurant come to life through this augmented reality animation. It's a great example of getting people to interact, to play, and to use technology around the experience, and not necessarily having to always create that physical experience itself, but using technology to enhance or augment the experience. By doing that, they create a connection with their customer, which allows them to create a sense of loyalty, which is just something that's really valuable in any industry. Well, there's a little bit of an example of where we're seeing things pivot towards this pop-up concept. But we've also seen a huge pivot towards the world of online and the opportunities that brings. And this pivot online is something where we can certainly expect to see the most disruption happening and the longest term impact of the pandemic. Many are referring to the pandemic as a period of forced digitalization. The pandemic has been really detrimental for so many businesses, shuttered restaurants, and all the financial hurdles that follow. But we've also seen those that are really agile and digitally savvy being able to reimagine their entire business model, not only the concept, the physical in-restaurant food concept, but how they bring their offer to market altogether. We've seen some really great ideas born out of crisis. For example, in Australia, born out of the bushfires, a platform called Spend With Us invited people to buy and shop locally through independent producers and order different gifts sets and gift boxes, which allow them to give an opportunity to all of those producers that have been heavily impacted to sell their produce differently and to connect with new audiences. It's also tapping into a revival of demand from consumers to seek out and to buy from independent businesses over those mainstream global brands, and I don't need to name which ones those are. We also see very interesting concepts emerging in the subscription space. Cuvée Privé is such a great example of innovation. They allow you to subscribe and to purchase your wine through subscription, but also to personalize that experience too. So you can adopt a vine and then you can see your own name on the vine, and you can have your own name on your bottle of wine. It's something which for a certain segment works really, really well, and it allows you to create that highly personalized experience whilst creating customer loyalty. And this is all driven online. So this is a business which works anywhere in the world. It's all about the concept, the packaging, and the way in which it's so unique and innovative that you can't help but be curious and be interested by it. This is how businesses are pivoting online and finding new opportunities to find new customers and create new business models by going online. One of my favorite examples is a new company called Dishbatch. It's a company born out of the pandemic, and it was created by a series of chefs who realized that if they couldn't do their business in the restaurant, then they had to bring the restaurant to others. And they created this platform where you can order a specific meal that's created by the restaurant once a month, and you can order that to be delivered ready to make yourself and complete that at-home experience. And now that platform has grown and grown and grown. So now this is a platform that includes many businesses, and it's a huge success. And it allows the public to order from really top restaurants and to have very, very high quality at-home restaurant-like experiences from restaurants that they respect and would have loved to visit. And I can bet you that this is a platform which is going to only get stronger once the restaurants open again, because they can now create that connection between the restaurant in person and the restaurant at home, something that's very powerful. We see also in the case of Milwaukee this great example of, again, bringing this idea of gift boxes and packaging to the doorsteps of people locally, encouraging a revival of spend and shop local, and encouraging people to discover through walking tours and through gift boxes the local producers who are just on their doorstep. This is something that we perhaps always took for granted, but during the pandemic we found a new way to actually appreciate what we have on our doorstep and really appreciate the hard strive of independent businesses. And now there's a strong determination and willingness from the public to get behind that. So here they've created a brilliant platform to sell that. And this was a tour operator that pivoted towards creating online transactions around the food experiences that existed in Milwaukee. And then we have Eat With, a platform which has been growing and disruptive for some time, which somehow replicates something of Airbnb experiences to create virtual online experiences where you can eat, cook and dine along with locals in every part of the world. And this just feeds off of that trend that we talked about earlier with Marks and Spencer's of doing things with others online, connecting socially online, but actually making a very participatory process of doing it yourself at the same time. So those are some of the macro trends when we think about how we connect and engage, but there's so many more trends happening right now. We see this trend towards short-circuit local food experiences just booming right now. There's been a real rejection of mainstream and mass tourism, and that's certainly reflected also in choices around restaurants and food. And now we see that guests and visitors want to seek out those really authentic food experiences. They want to connect with the local environment and have something where they feel connected. A great example very close to us in the UK is a restaurant called, a hotel in fact, called The Pig, and they source everything. They have a 25-mile menu. Nothing comes from further than 25 miles away, and they're very proud to make this their key differentiator. Their focus is on the detail, on the sourcing, and on the seasonality, and not on having everything and anything from anywhere in the world. This is actually what people are seeking, and this is actually what makes them really stand out, is that respect for local produce and their determination to support local producers. In fact, they're very much rooted in the nature, and this is something which really helps them strengthen that message. They're also very transparent, so on their website they introduce you to all the suppliers and they encourage you to go and purchase and order from those suppliers themselves. And they're also very proud to have a sort of kitchen restaurant where they source as much from their backyard as they can to put that into the dishes. So it's really something that connects with the public, and it's something that really, really works if it's done through and through. They also have a 0-mile menu, which is food that's produced on site. And that's a trend we've seen in so many places. In Australia, the Lake House Hotel restaurant has a farm on site, and everything comes from that farm. Another great example of connecting the visitor experience of staying within the nature and experiencing everything around you, but also tasting the flavor of that as well, and knowing that everything comes from a short circuit, has a low carbon impact, and you know exactly where that food comes from. Traceability and transparency are both really key here. Slightly different, but still with the same idea in mind, and also very local to here, is Gusbourne Vineyard. They talk a lot about the provenance of the food and the wine and how they produce it in intricate detail. For them, there's a very close connection between the brand that they're creating, one that represents quality and a respect for the process, and the experience of visiting and discovering that for yourself and being able to taste but also see that in action. And so they've created a very rich brand which can't really be described as either a solely wine brand or a solely visitor brand. It's a merge between many different things, and it's an invitation to come and discover their passion for what they do, their processes, and the determination and dedication they have to respect the purity of how they do things. Something that's very important to also communicate through storytelling. Right, so if we zoom out, we've got a few more things to get through today. I'm going to jump up to this part of the board, which is the gleaning revolution. This is all about people's determination now to have sort of conscious consumerism. It's a really big trend happening, and it's only expected to get bigger. And it's something that's been brought around by this digital world we live in, where people are more socially and consciously connected with their choices, with their decisions, and there's that availability of information online which allows for transparency. We can jump straight to Ireland, where there's initiatives like Food Cloud, which are social enterprises focused on reducing food waste and making sure that food is redistributed within Ireland to charities and organizations that can put it to good use. It's a great example of entrepreneurship with social value at the core. We see also things like Act Now, from the United Nations, inviting young people to make commitments, to decide where they're going to act to have an impact, and using technology to create a sense of an environment where they can pledge, they can discover, and they can create challenges where they actually strive to make a difference. There's something that can really work for businesses of all sorts, creating that sense of movement and that sense of encouraging people to get behind something that you're very passionate about and trying to achieve. We also see apps really doing interesting things right now, like Too Good To Go, which focuses on taking end of shelf life food from restaurants and redistributing it to the public through apps where they can discover different food in different places and make sure that that doesn't go to waste. Again, focused on reducing food waste, but making sure that that there's a very minimum wastage and it goes to people who might need it more. Geeky is a great example of a platform which is all about transparency. So as you can see here, you can monitor the carbon footprint and every intricate detail of how your food arrives in the supermarket, and it's something they've connected with some of the main supermarkets in the UK. Other apps like Karma allow you to, again, have a socially conscious decision-making approach to where you buy food from, where you discover food, and how you enjoy that food, allowing the mix of things like transparency and geolocalization and detail on product to all exist in that digital space. And then apps like Olio, very similar as Too Good To Go, but also allowing consumers to recycle their own food waste to make sure that they're throwing out less and less and giving it to people in need. And that's something which has taken off in many countries. So we see a growing trend there towards platforms that allow people to have a complete transparency on their decision-making process as consumers. And we see increasingly businesses tapping into that and realizing that that shift in the consumer mindset is one that they need to reflect in their decision-making processes as a business. That having a business with purpose is so important today. And I want to tell you the story of Good Luck Beer House. This is a Singaporean-based business that had to close during the pandemic, and they turned to digital to find a new market, to allow people to order fresh beer from the tap and have it at their home within an hour, something that they never imagined doing. But during the pandemic, they also realized that they needed to pivot in terms of supporting their community as well. So they created an initiative called Beer for a Cause. This is a very small business that decided that they had to do something with purpose, and they donated 100% of the proceeds to a local old people's home to help support them in that time in need. Something which is really admirable for a small business to do. Not always easy, but it actually gives them a sense of being rooted in the community and being very committed to what they're doing. On a slightly bigger scale, the independent brewer Brewdog did something completely different. They've been going for some time, and they've launched initiatives like their own forest, where you can plant a tree every time you buy a specific beer. And as you can see here, they have this slogan, buy one, get one tree. So very smart with how they brand that as well. They make it very exciting. They make it very accessible to be socially conscious. But they're also very transparent in how they do things. So they've recently released the sustainability report, recognizing that they can't just produce beer, but they need to be able to demonstrate their commitments and how they are committed to sustainability. They refer to themselves as carbon negative, so they actually contribute more than they cost to the environment. And transparency goes all the way through to the very core of their business model. They're looking to continually raise money to grow the business and to keep going forwards. And they do that in a very transparent way, using crowdfunding, but doing that all themselves. And so you can see here a breakdown of how they explain the value that you get if you invest different shares in that work. So a great example of how you can grow a business through a sense of community and driven by a sense of purpose, and something that I would say is a necessity for almost any business today. We see community being right at the heart of everything, and this is something that every business should now consider at the heart of their offer. Community-driven development is key, and in Los Angeles we see really exciting developments like this out-of-town shopping center, which is only featuring independent businesses. It's a rejection of mainstream, and it's a triumph and a support for local, passionate, independent producers and businesses. We see in Atlanta, the Atlanta Forest, something which was very recently announced, and it's a great initiative which is allowing locals to be urban farmers and to also educate and learn more about food and the origin of food by producing it themselves, joining workshops and organizing activities and experiences where they can connect with each other. This huge revival back to community is something that we've seen accelerated through the pandemic, but has been growing for a long time and is particularly important in tourism. And if we think purely about tourism, we see this great example of Sentosa Resorts. It's a really good example, very similar to Brewdog, about creating transparency. They produce an impact report where they show every metric within their business about the impact they have, where they source the produce from, and how they replenish and reinvest in making sure that they leave no trace behind, only a positive one. And of course, many people now are aware of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and this in effect has given a sense of a catalyst to many of these movements and a focus to be able to identify where they can have an impact and focus on one or several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we now see businesses that put the Sustainable Development Goals at the core of their business, almost the blueprint to their business plan, as those that are becoming the champions who are most disruptive and showing the most potential to really enter the market with something different. We see things like circularity in the visitor economy being really, really key. My last brewery example, because there's quite a few here, is this great example of the Brussels Beer Project, one that I think is really, really cool. They're a crowd-funded brewer, and they've recently created a pop-up beer, which is creating beer from bread. And they have been determined to also try to address some of the issues highlighted by the UN's SDGs and create a short-circuit, circular economy approach to creating beer, where they reuse leftover bread from restaurants and others that are in their ecosystem to create this beer. But this is about creating an experience as well for customers to buy into, for customers to get excited about. And this is why communicating their DNA, their brand values and proposition at the core is also really, really important for them to have a sense of purpose as a business. We see this in so many places and often connected in a very strong way to the local environment. Again, another one that's from very nearby to here is a business called Heckles. It's in Margate, and they focus on cosmetics, and their focus is about sourcing everything locally, from, for example, the local seascape and the seaweed and the environment that they can use there. And they're very, very powerful at telling the story around that and inviting others to discover, learn and respect the power of those natural resources which they are tapping into as a business. They're very much passionate about communicating how they source, where they source. For example, they have a GPS product range where they have the exact proximity of where the materials were sourced in order for you to go and discover that yourselves. So really focused on where they source things and allowing that to be a very transparent process. Something that anybody can do. For example, every restaurant menu can have the GPS coordinates or the location or the traceability through things like QR codes to allow your customers to understand the origins of their food. And whilst this is perhaps not going to transform business overnight, it's about generally shifting the way in which you bring your offer forwards in a way that's aligned with what customers are now demanding more than ever. And of course we see, pop-ups like zero waste restaurants becoming more and more common, allowing you to dine in a restaurant where you know there is no waste. This restaurant is definitely one of our favorites. It's called Silo. It was born in Brighton and it's now in London. And they pride themselves in not having a bin. so they don't throw anything away. And that's an incredible statement to make, but it's something that they've been committed to. And it's taken them some time to find how to do that and how to make that economically viable. But now we see governments almost mandating this. This is an example from Singapore, where there's a determination to move all businesses in this direction, to commit businesses to that change. And the visitor economy represents a great opportunity to sometimes create showcases and platforms where you can do something quite edgy, quite innovative, and shout about it and be proud about it. Well, I've covered all the case studies today. I'm going to end with a quick look at what some of the macro shifts are showing us. And then I will end with just a key note on contactless experiences and technology. I don't have time to cover everything here, so I will give you the link and you can read it in detail at your leisure. But there are a number of macro trends happening. First of all, you need to think mobile first about everything. We've seen from apps like Olio how important that mobile engagement is with potential users and customers. But this is also taking place in terms of online ordering, and you only need to mention being in the kitchen and having that hybrid experience, how important that iPad experience is. We see the transformative element of everything right now. So the way in which we change the value that we incorporate within our business, the way in which we connect and engage with our customers, the way in which digital plays a role in every experience. This is hugely transformative, and we need to step back and take a look at the bigger picture. Creating not just brilliant food, but also creating immersive experiences to explore, understand, have the transparency, or connect with that in a different way is really, really key. We need to think about the technology we have at our disposal and how that can either solve problems or create really unique perspectives. Authenticity has always been really, really key in tourism, but it is just as important when we think about the origin of our food and the passion that goes behind producing incredible dishes and incredible recipes. But being able to tell that story and being able to show the human side of what we do is really key. That's where storytelling plays a very, very important role. Personalization is now so important, more important than ever. If we think about these online business models, it's all about adapting to create a very personalized and individual connection with customers. The example of Cuvée Privé is a great example of being able to do that. But that can increasingly happen with in-restaurant or in-destination experiences as well, where we create that digital relationship, because that allows us to build a profile through data. Conscious leadership, it's a bigger term that perhaps doesn't always immediately mean something, but it's a recognition that we have to be conscious of the change that's happening, and we have to put ourselves forward to make that change. Sometimes you have to take risks, and conscious leadership is about standing up, taking the risks, and also taking a joint and collective responsibility for the outcome. It's important that if we see the market changing, we recognize what's happening and we move with it. Well, we talked about exclusivity with those different private dining experiences. This is only something that's going to strengthen more and more. And as we all start to travel once again, there will be a trend towards traveling in bubbles, in family groups, and seeking out much, much more value-driven fulfillment. Because, frankly, we haven't had the chance to travel. We now appreciate that time that we have with each other in a way that we perhaps didn't really appreciate it before. Well, user centricity is really thinking of everything through the customer's mindset. We have to be customer centric, and we have to always think about what is that experience going to look like for them. So whether that's a seamless, contactless experience when you're using technology, or whether that's thinking solely about the customer's experience in designing that incredible food experience. Think user centricity all the time. Where you can leverage data in all of these different things we've spoken about, use it to understand what's happening and build a relationship through data with your customers. It's something that will open up such a deeper understanding of what you can do. Think about how to use digital to be more immersive. So think about how to create new experiences through digital, as we saw with the augmented reality restaurant experience. And once you have that relationship, think about the digital life cycle. How do you keep that connection alive? If you have someone in your restaurant or buying your produce, how do you then bring them into an online space where they'll experience that virtual experience? If you can create a digital relationship with your customers, maybe even stemming out of a taste or a flavor of something really incredible, then you can retain those customers and create loyalty, as well as creating brand reputation. More than anything, and I hope this is the message which comes across strong from my talk today, purpose and values must be the baseline of everything you do. If you're not clear on your values, why you do, what your passion is, or what you care about or trying to commit to, then how can you ever expect your customers to follow that journey with you? I hope those macro trends were useful. My very final point is on the technology which is changing the everyday restaurant experiences. We see from apps like Eaton this good example of micro ratings. Increasingly, customers expect to be able to see reviews not only on the place, but on every single dish in the restaurant. This is not only about ranking and reviewing or giving positive feedback or complaining. This is about helping them to make a choice, make a decision based on feedback from others. We see apps like Dines allowing restaurants to go fully digital, both in capturing data, but in offering that mobile menu, just as you've probably seen with delivery apps, at the table, and making sure that's a great experience. So it's not a negative experience, it's actually a preferred way of ordering now for many customers. And it allows you to create certain operational improvements, such as the time the waiters and waitresses spend with the customers and reducing contact. And we also see apps like WalkUp allowing digital queues to be created, so you deal with problems around crowding when you have those busy moments for the restaurant. There's so many more innovations happening when we talk about technology, but that's all we have time to look at today. I'm going to zoom out, leave you with a quick zoomed out look at this board. I will give you the link to this, and I hope you jump in and enjoy. But for now, that's all we have time for. And I would like to say thank you very much for your attention, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.